Well, most of us come in here with a lot of different things on our mind. There'll be people in this room that think like this. Like, what if I never get married? Or what if you get married and then you wish you were single? Or what if you get married and then you meet somebody else that you wish you could marry, but you can't because you're already married? Or what if the person that you were supposed to marry married somebody else because they didn't notice that you liked their post on Instagram? What if you marry the wrong person and then you have the wrong kids? What if you marry the right person and then you have the right kids, but then you live in the wrong city? Or what if you marry the right person, have the right kids, live in the right city, but then you send your kids to the wrong school? What if you have the right spouse and the right kids, the right city, the right school, but then you choose the wrong career and you can't quit because you got a house payment and health insurance and car insurance and student loans, and you have a coffee habit that you have to support, and then your kid needs braces and you got to pay for that. The problem is you can't pay for your kids' braces because you got to pay for all this other stuff. Now they got jacked up teeth and they're going to end up marrying the wrong person. And now they're going to have the wrong kids, and then you're going to have the wrong kids, wrong grandkids, and that's an awkward conversation to have with your grandkids. But you can't think about any of that right now because you have all these emails that you need to respond to and all these text messages that you're behind on. As a matter of fact, your mom texted you last week, and you still haven't replied to her, and she's your mom. You need to text her back. And you've got some bills to be paid, and you haven't set those up on automatic payment yet, and I don't know why, because it's 2020, and you're still putting checks in the mail like a caveman from 1999. And what about retirement? You'd be a millionaire right now if you could save all the money you have from your daily coffee habit, but now it's too late, and you might as well get a double shot grande as you start the day because you're going to need caffeine because you're going to be working for the rest of your life. How's everybody feeling? Stressed? Can I tell you, we've never been more stressed statistically. 62% of college students say they feel overwhelmed and anxious. 1 million workers miss work every day, costing companies $300 billion annually. 80% of hospital visits are stress-related to anxiety. It's the number one issue for women, number two issue for men. $1 trillion a year spent treating anxiety and stress as a problem. It's an epidemic. We live, every year, I don't know if you know this, but they do a poll for what's the most stressful nation. And there's a country that repeatedly wins. Anybody want to guess who that is? Switzerland, right, absolutely, that's right, yeah. I'm just kidding, it's us, it's totally us. Because when we increase possessions, we increase anxiety. That's the correlation they found. We're constantly stressed about everything we can't control. See if this sounds like you. See, there are relational symptoms to stress and anxiety. Stress has a negative impact on my personal and professional life. There's difficulty managing work and family responsibilities. I fight with people that I'm close to. I've been alienated from a friend or a family member because of stress. There's also physical symptoms of stress. See if any of these make sense to you. Have you ever experienced fatigue, headaches, upset stomach, muscle tension, change in appetite, teeth grinding, a change in sex drive, or feeling dizzy? What about psychological symptoms experienced from stress and anxiety? Are you irritable, angry, feel nervous, lack energy, or just all the time think you could cry? How's everybody feeling? You were like, a lot better before I came in here. That's awesome. Well, before we jump into this, I want us to define these two words because we often use stress and anxiety as synonyms, but they're not really. Stress is fear related to things that are happening now. Anxiety is fear related to things that have not happened but could. And we start to imagine all the worst case scenarios. We imagine threats to our life and then we get stuck in that thinking. It's a tidal wave of what ifs that ultimately for many people are followed by depression and then paralysis where we do nothing. There are some triggers to stress and anxiety. See if these make sense to you. Well, the three most common triggers are, the first one is isolation, which sounds weird because we say that we're the most connected generation ever. And we are connected, but we're not interacting, and there's a difference. We're watching. We're voyeurs to everybody else's life, and it turns out that simply watching everybody else live life increases my own feeling of isolation. There's a weird statistic out there of the vast majority of people on Instagram and on Snapchat and on Facebook aren't posting anything, they're watching everybody else's posts. The other thing that triggers it is insignificance. It's where you look at everybody else's life and you go, man, they're crushing it. They're doing a great job. They seem to be #winning at everything in their life. But I'm not. I'm either going nowhere or, scary yet, or scarier still is as I may be moving in reverse. And then the other thing that triggers a lot of anxiety and stress in us is insecurity. We feel unsafe. And yet that's weird because really, statistically, we live in a world that is safer now than it's ever been. Now, 50 years ago, the life expectancy was 70. Today, it's 83. In the last 25 years, death by cancer has dropped by 27%. Global poverty in the last 20 years is down 65%. Terrorist attacks and violent crimes over the last 20 years is down by 20%. And yet if you and I are talking, we go, doesn't feel that way, does it? Like we tend to feel like it's worse than it's ever been. And here's why. Because the speed of the negative information that we receive outpaces our ability to process it in a healthy way. We're taking in so much that we don't know how to handle it well. I didn't grow up with this. I was a child of the 80s. Anybody in here with me? Okay, I was born in the 70s, okay, I'm just gonna be honest. But I was a child of the 80s. Let me tell you what stress was like in the 80s. Nothing. For me growing up as a child in the 80s, I didn't feel a sense of stress. There was no internet. It had not been really born. And if it had been born, by the end of that, you could get to the end of it in a few minutes. Like, there was no that. There was no 24-hour news cycle. As a matter of fact, there was two ways that you accessed the news. You read a newspaper. For those of you that don't know, it's an oversized magazine in black and white that you open up like this. Or you watched the news that came on at a time that you didn't stream or access on your phone. And if you missed it, you missed it. And you know what? I found great joy in missing it. I saw it as something old people did. And now it comes to you. Like you're in a great place, you're in a great mood, you're maybe sitting in a restaurant, you're dining, you're having a great time, and all of a sudden Twitter goes, the world's coming to an end! And you go, oh my gosh, I was just having appetizers and now I have stress. It happens. Well, today as we jump into this, the question that we're going to answer is not, will anxiety or stress happen in your life? It will. So if you're like waiting for me to go, oh, let me teach you how to avoid anxiety and stress, that is not this sermon. And as a matter of fact, that is not this world. We live in a world that is on the other side of Genesis chapter 3, which is what we know as the fall, which means that sin has entered the world. And by definition, we live in a broken world. So there's going to be negative circumstances and challenging circumstances that exist in this world. If you're looking for a world without those, there is a world like that, but you have to die to get there. But in this world, there's going to be some difficult circumstances. So instead of asking, will you feel anxious or stressed, the question is, where will that emotion take you? Your emotions take you on a ride. We talked about this last week. If you didn't catch that, you need to go back and watch it. Otherwise, you're going to be lost a little bit for a few weeks. But your emotions take you somewhere. I drive an old pickup truck. I get made fun of for my old pickup truck. Because there's some things that happen. Like there are people, if I give them my keys, they go to my truck, they come back and they go, your truck won't start. They can't turn the key. I explained to them over and over again that the key to my truck is similar to Mjolnir, the hammer that is wielded by Thor. If it deems you unworthy, you can't start my truck. So I have to run out and start the truck up. When we were dealing with the construction around here, I would drive around in my truck and tires would get punctured about every 3 days. And so I was like, I'm not going to put new tires on every 3 days. And so I just went and bought old tires from this like kind of seedy but awesome tire place here in Rowlett. And I would just be like, you have an old tire that'll fit my truck, shove that on there. And he would be like, all right, cool. And then we would do that and I would drive around. And so every morning we played this great game show at my house called Open the Door and See If My Tire is Flat. And many days it was, and I would have to bring a little pump thing out there and pump up my tire and then head off to go take kids to school. There are people that like, they'll get in my truck and they get a little anxious because every once in a while the steering wheel like locks up when you're turning. It's not a big deal. You can make it work. It'll make sounds, and I'm not a mechanical person, so somebody goes like, what sound does it make? And I'm like, I don't know, it just makes that sound. And there are people that go like, riding with you, Jason, I'm just getting in your truck, I'm anxious. And for many of us, that's how we live our life. We live our life getting into this vehicle of worst case scenarios and daily stressors. And what David is going to do as we look at one of the Psalms today is he's going to help us with this today. We're going to get to look at the Psalms. And by the way, let me say this. When you read the Psalms, they are not prescriptive in nature. And what I mean by that is they're not necessarily telling you what to do exactly. They're telling you what happened. They're being honest. And it's poetically being honest. And so David is going to tell you the very real like anxiety and stress that he felt and where he found comfort. But it can be dark in places because he's being honest. And so when you read it, it's not 6 steps to dealing with stress. It's an emotional experience. David is essentially going to take his kind of truck of anxiety and pull up alongside of us, open up the door and ask us to get in the back seat, and then we're going to take off and travel with him on his journey as he deals with anxiety and stress in his life. And we're going to see how he handles it poorly and how he handles it well. And so I want you to look real quick in Psalm 55, and I'm going to do something I don't normally do on Sunday mornings. I'm going to read the entire chapter to you. And I want you to listen to what David is going to go through. He says in verse 1, God, listen to my prayer and do not hide from my plea for help. Pay attention to me and answer me. I'm restless and in turmoil with my complaint. So he's like, I got something going on. I got a complaint. I need to talk about it. Because the enemy's words, because of the pressure of the wicked, for they bring down disaster on me and harass me in anger. Listen to the emotion. My heart shudders within me. Terrors of death sweep over me. Fear and trembling grip me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, if only I had wings like a dove, I would fly away and find rest. How far would I flee? I would stay in the wilderness. Selah. Now, Selah is a word we'll come back to in a minute. It means something cool. He says, I would hurry to my shelter from the raging wind and the storm. Lord, confuse and confound their speech, for I see violence and strife in the city. He's going to tell you some stressing. Day and night, they make their rounds on its walls. Crime and trouble are within it. Destruction is inside it. Oppression and deceit never leave its marketplace. He hasn't been real specific. Now he's going to get specific. Now it's not my enemy who insults me, for otherwise I could bear it. It's not a foe who rises up against me, otherwise I could hide from him. It's you, a man, my peer, my companion, and a good friend. We used to have close fellowship, and we walked with the crowd into the house of God. He said, and this is somebody I was close to. We went to church together. That's what he's saying. And now listen to his response to this man that he once had good fellowship with and went to church together with. He said, let death take them by surprise. Dang, David. Let them go down to Sheol alive. In other words, let them burn. Because evil is in their homes and within them. But I called to God, and the Lord will save me. I complain and groan morning, noon, and night. That's important. We'll come back to that. And he hears my voice. Though many are against me, he will redeem me from my battle unharmed. God, the one enthroned from long ago, will hear and will humiliate them because they do not change and do not fear God. Verse 20, my friend acts violently against those at peace with him. He violates his covenant. I love this language here. It's very poetic. His buttery words are smooth, but war is in his heart. His words are softer than oil, but they are drawn swords. Verse 22, cast your burden on the Lord and he will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. God, you will put them down to the pit of destruction. Men of bloodshed and treachery will not live out half their days, but I will trust in you. So I want to look at this very honest moment in David's life and say, what can it teach us about how we deal with this in our life? And can I just go ahead and tell you, some of you are going to hate this sermon. And the reason you're going to hate this sermon is we're so wired for me to go, I'm going to give you a to-do list so that you can carry out and get rid of stress and anxiety in your life, and that's not what's about to happen. So I just want you to ask you to pray even right now that God would let you be open to what he wants to say. See, here's the first thing that David is going to say when it comes to getting rid of the stress and anxiety in his life is basically this, that he's going to be honest about his feelings of anxiety and being overwhelmed. He's just going to be honest with God. And maybe you grew up where being anxious or overwhelmed wasn't okay, like you were told to stuff that down, don't talk about it out loud. David sings it. The book of Psalms is songs. David's going to write a song called I Wish My Friend Would Burn Forever. We don't sing that song here, I'm just saying. But that's what David's doing. You got to imagine that being that honest for David, where he says, I'm overwhelmed, is probably hard because David has a reputation. I mean, this is the same kid at 12 who walked out onto a battlefield where there were two opposing armies and a 9-foot 6-inch giant in the middle of the army, where everybody else was overwhelmed at the size of this giant except for the 12-year-old. And now he's overwhelmed? That rep sometimes can negatively impact us. He's the same kid that walks out to Goliath and goes, hey dude, you don't overwhelm me. My God's bigger than you. I'm going to cut your head off, bro. And then he does. Can I just tell you what I think is so true in so many of our lives? When you have the reputation of being the person who fixes things, when you have the reputation of being the person who gets stuff done, it is so difficult to simply say, I need to be fixed. I need help. Can I tell you, if you're feeling anxious or stressed this morning, and statistically almost everybody in this room is, it's normal. It's not what it means to be weak, it's what it means to be human. You can have the strength of David and still have times in your life where you go, it's too much. I feel overwhelmed. That happens. And the worst thing that you can do in that moment is go, I got it. And the best, most courageous thing you can do is say, God, rescue me. But we're not often taught this in church. We're taught that if you feel overwhelmed or anxious or stressed, that you need to have more faith or a better prayer life. And I'm not saying that God doesn't want us to have a better prayer life and a stronger faith and confess our sins. He does. But God is not looking at you going, you know what? Your prayer that you just gave me, that was a C- prayer. I'm going to throw some stress on you. That's not how God functions. See, we need to understand that anxiety and stress for most people feel like a pit that you cannot get out of. God is going to lead us to a place called conviction, which is a tunnel. It seems dark and it is difficult, but there is a way out through Him. Amen. David simply begins this process by being honest with God and say, I'm struggling. And can I tell you, some of the greatest leaders in the Bible and in history wrestled with anxiety and stress? I love how there's a guy named Peter Scazzaro who wrote a book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and I love the way he sums this up. Listen to this. It says, the Bible does not spin the flaws and the weaknesses of its heroes. Moses was a murderer. Hosea's wife was a prostitute. Peter rebuked God. Noah got drunk. Jonah was a racist. Jacob was a liar. John Mark deserted Paul. Elijah got burned out. Jeremiah was depressed and suicidal. Thomas doubted. Moses had a temper. Timothy had ulcers. And all of these people send the same message, that every human being on earth, regardless of their gifts, regardless of their strengths, is weak and vulnerable and dependent on God. See, David is going to talk about what he wants to do in dealing with his anxiety. He's going to initially give us the wrong response. You know what his response to anxiety and stress is? Escape. How many of you have ever felt overwhelming and stressed and went, let's just get out of here? I know some people who literally uprooted their whole families and go, let's move to a different state and start over. Let's hit the reset button. If we run from everything and escape, that's what we'll do. We see it. David says it. He's going to say, if only I had wings like a dove, I would fly away and find rest. How far away I would flee. I would stay in the wilderness, Selah. And that word Selah is one of two things. And it could be either right here. It's either in the song, it's a pause where you tell the singer to take a breath. The other interpretation of the word Selah is forever. Where he goes, I could just run off to the wilderness forever. How many of you, when you're dealing with your stresses and anxieties, go, you know what? Let's just get away forever. That's what he's dealing with. I love how the Message transliteration will say this. Listen to these words. Remember, Psalms is a song. And in my opinion, this sounds like a country song. I want some peace and quiet. I want to walk in the country. I want a cabin in the woods. That's how the Message translates this. Here's how this did in my head, because my brain's weird. I wrote a country song. It goes like this. I want to walk in the country, want a cabin in the woods. All you people stress me out. Ain't a one of you no good. That's what that happened in my brain, okay? See, David's on Airbnb looking for a cabin to escape and get off the grid forever. He's being honest, but that's the wrong response. Here's the next thing he does. And the next thing I think it'll challenge us is give a name to your struggle. David says, it's not just an enemy who assaults me. It's a friend, a peer. We went to church together, and it hurts. And he is specific. We often pray too generically about anxiety and stress, and we end that prayer by feeling more anxious and stressed. Because we're praying about a symptom and not a cause. Anxiety is not the cause. Anxiety is stress. Anxiety, either one, is a symptom. See, there is an underlying issue. And there's often for us a connection between who and what we can't control and the anxiety that we feel. And we need to name the issue and bring that to God. And David's so honest that it's quite honestly, it's uncomfortable. He's like, I wish they would die fast or burn forever. It's not a good response, by the way, but he's being honest. Can you name your anxiety? Like if I say that right now, some of you guys are going, I can name my anxiety. It's a person and I can tell you their name. Like that's how clear it would be to you. Like it's this person that you would go, if I could simply control that person, my anxiety would go away. Like if they would do what they're supposed to do, or if they would change what they need to change, I would be fine. For others of you, maybe it's not just a random person, maybe it's your significant other. Maybe it's somebody you're married to or somebody you wish you were married to, and your thoughts are like this. Man, I have feelings toward them that they don't have towards me. And I wish I could control their feelings, or I wish I could control their attraction or their desire for me, but you can't. And the more you try to control, the more they push away and the more anxious you feel. And so the more anxious you feel, the more you try to control, so the more they push away, so the more anxious you feel. And so the more anxious you feel, the more you try to control, the more they push away and the more anxious you feel, and you're in a cycle of anxiety filled with what ifs. What if he never says it? What if she never feels that way? What if he cheats? What if he cheats again? What if she doesn't say yes? What if he never asks? All things we can't control. One of the key things that we feel anxiety and stress over, if you're a parent, is children. Can I get a good amen this morning? It's so true. If we could just control all of our kids' decisions, feelings, and fashion choices, life would be so much easier. Like, I don't know why Crocs became popular with children. There's the dumbest shoes I've ever seen in my life. It's like you're wearing a human version of SpongeBob on your feet, and then they sell you little gibbets that you stick in the holes. I don't even know what that word means. Sorry, that's a whole different message. Here so if I could control their entertainment, if I could control their friendships, my life would be easier. And then we start to ask the what if questions. What if they never can, what if they do something they can't come back from? What if they marry the person they're dating and I don't really like the person they're dating? What if they never come? That ship has sailed. Okay. There are parents that sit there and go like, what if they never come home? And other parents that are going, what if they never leave home? And the more we try to control them, the more they go their own way and the more anxious we feel. So the more we try to control them and the more they go their own way and the more anxious we feel. Can I just tell you, I love this passage out of Philippians. And let's do a little Bible study this morning. I think it's important. It says, don't be anxious about anything. Now, when I see that, my first feeling is to go, well, I'm done. I'm anxious about things. But can I just tell, like, if you're looking at that, does that mean like not a zip zero? Like we can't be anxious about anything? Is that what he meant? It's not exactly what it means. It's written in what's called the present active tense, which means it's saying never get stuck in an ongoing state of anxiety. In other words, Max Lucado said it this way. I thought this was really cool. He said, the presence of anxiety in your life is unavoidable, but the prison of anxiety is optional. It says, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, in every little thing, in every specific thing, make your request known to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. Pray specifically, name the issue with God, pray honest prayers. And here's honestly David's turning point when he invites God into his anxious moment. Instead of spiraling out of control, he's going to elevate. He said all the wrong things, but then he's going to lean into this. He's going to say, I complain morning, noon, and night, and he hears my voice. He says, though many are against me, God will redeem me from my battle unharmed. He's going to say, cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. See, if you were here last week, you know we talked about the thought spiral or the elevation. That oftentimes we don't choose our emotion. Sometimes we just feel a certain way, but we choose the thought we attach to it. If you do this, if you look at it this way, if the emotion is anxiety and stress, most of us, we choose the thought of I'll do what I want. Here's what I mean by do what I want. I'm stressed, therefore I have the right to eat whatever I want. I'm stressed, therefore I have the right to drink whatever I want. I'm stressed, therefore I have the right to be happy. I can look at things, even though I know I shouldn't, I can look at whatever I want. I can indulge even in sinful activity because right now I just need to feel good. And so what it leads me to is a behavior of self-indulgence where it doesn't, I'll even indulge in sin and I'll know it's sin and I'll call it sin, but I just need something to make me feel better right now. And that breaks relationships because it starts to make me selfish. Because all I want from everybody is I need you to make me feel better. I'm stressed and I'm anxious, so you're now a resource to ensure my happiness. You're not a person. And ultimately it leads me to a consequence of I'm alone and ineffective. What we talked about last week is what if I changed the thought? So in other words, if I flipped this upside down, it would go like this. I have anxiety and stress, but the thought that I'm going to choose to attach is, instead of becoming self-indulgent, I'm going to choose to serve and to love other people instead of myself. That's not a natural response to stress and anxiety, but imagine if you chose that thought with your stress and anxiety. What it would lead to is now my behavior is I'm doing good towards others instead of being self-destructive to myself. I want to bring other people to know Christ. I want to share with them. I want to encourage them. I want to build them up. And ultimately, that leads my relationships to be loving. And then the ultimate consequence of that is I am now connective. I am now effective. And I am now ultimately, if you do it right, dependent on God and not anybody else for my life. That we trust God. That's what David comes to. David comes to a point of trust. How does he get there? He tells us, morning, noon, and night. Oftentimes, we're sitting there going, can we just get you to have a daily time with God once a day? Can I tell you, David simply goes, not enough. Not enough. You need to be fellowshipping with God, with the Word of God in your life all day long. That's what you want. That's the desire. And the way that looks can be very different in individual lives, but that's what you need. David goes, if I'm going to battle this, I'm going to go morning, noon, and night. And here's the thing. Here's what we often do is we go, I'll start off morning, noon, night, then I feel better, and then I stop meeting with God. Can I just tell you? You may get a place where you go, I no longer feel stressed or anxious. Can I just tell you something as a human person? It's coming back. Something else will come. And so you need to stay in the habit of meeting with God morning, noon, and night, talking to God, communicating with God. But instead, and most of us will go, I don't have time for that. But I think, well, if I'm just being honest, we're liars. Because I'm going to tell you, often my mornings, the first thing that I do is I don't turn down my anxiety and stress, I turn it up. Tell me if this sounds anything like your morning. The average person, when we wake up today in the 2020 culture of America, what is the first thing that you grab a hold of? Phone. And the first thing that I look at on my phone is what went horribly wrong in the world while I was sleeping. That's what's going to happen. Who's mad? Who's upset? What email did I get? What text message did I get? What news broke on Twitter? Like, what celebrity marriage is coming to an end? What earth-shattering natural occurrences happened where in the world? Like, that's what I wake up to in the morning. And then after I get done with that, I look at my calendar, and my calendar usually tells me two things. It reminds me of all the things that I should have gotten done yesterday that I didn't get to, and all the things that I should get to today that I probably won't. And I start my day off by reminding myself of everything that's wrong in the world and everything in my life that's putting pressure on me, and then wonder why my day isn't going well. Instead of doing what David said, which I met with God morning, noon, and night. At night, we don't get much better. By averages and statistics today, the last thing that every person in this room, like 80% of the people in this room are doing when they fall asleep, when you battle your eyelids until they finally come to a close, is either looking at a small screen or a big screen. That's the last thing that many people are doing, or watching TV or on social media, and we're looking at everybody else's life that seems to be filled with love and laughter, and it's filtered through Instagram, and it looks great. Every other parent is brilliant, and they're crushing it, and every house looks beautiful, and when they redecorate for each season, you click on their picture, and you zoom in, and you go, looks like somebody bought a new couch, and like you just kind of get angry, like this moment of jealousy in you. We fall asleep cranking up the volume on anxiety. We wake up cranking up the volume on anxiety. And I just want to say this, feelings need to be acknowledged. They need to be empathized. But then in a spirit of wisdom, we need to ask God to help you to know where to go with those feelings. I told you, you may not like this sermon because I'm not going to give you a to-do list to tap into. I want to give you something else to tap into, and that's not a to-do list, but to be reminded of who God is. David is honest, but it doesn't end there. He stops talking to God about his anxiety, and he starts talking to his anxiety about God. David's preaching a sermon by the end of this. You know who he's preaching to? Himself. He has spent time with God, and now God is speaking to him. He's listening to who God is. He's being reminded of God's promises and God's character. He's turning up the volume on who God is, that God is a rescuer, that God is a redeemer, that God is a healer, that God can be counted on. And while the anxiety and stress may stay there in our life in some ways as a low-level hum, what he's saying is that when you begin to focus on who God is and you crank up the volume on essentially what we would call worship, as we elevate worship and remember who God is, the sounds of our anxiety and stress get softer. They're overpowered by the overpowerer, by God himself. And so again, this is a little bit more intangible for some of you because it's not a list of things to do where I would simply go, if you're living in a life that is locked into a prison of anxiety and stress, you need more worship in your life. And I don't just mean songs, although we're going to do that in a moment. And I love that we can take music and we can be reminded of who God is. But you can do that in any number of ways. You need to do it in the Word of God. You need to do it through your community of fellowship with other people who are loving on God with you and are challenging you to grow in Christ. You need to be reminded of who God is and that, yes, this world is broken, but we have a God who has overcome this world. That's how you begin to push this back and to drown out anxiety. And so I want to end maybe in a little bit different way. I just want to take a moment right now for everybody in this room. How many of you walked in here this morning and this week has been filled with stress and anxiety? Can we just be honest this morning? Yeah, look around. A lot of people. So can we just take a moment and we're going to sing some songs. And as we sing, can I just challenge you in this? Some of you are going to go, well, I'm not much of a singer. I get that. Can we just listen and sing and focus not on what you, so often we come and go, I'm not a singer, so I'm not gonna, listen, this worship's not about you. Worship's about him. Oftentimes we have this misunderstanding when a worship team takes the stage that they're there to perform for us, and that's not true. You're a part of the worship team as a believer in Christ. These guys are just up here with instruments plugged in. We are singing to one audience member, and that is God. And so this morning, can we just maybe we can start to push back some of that anxiety and stress in our life by simply being reminded that we have a God who is sufficient. We have a God that is powerful. We have a God that is bigger than any of the struggles in our life. That the circumstances of our life, they're there. They're going to continue to be there. Until we reach perfection in eternity with God, this world is going to have turmoil. The Bible says this world will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. We start to overcome our stress and anxiety by simply leaning into the reality of who we belong to, who God is.